I was ordained to the priesthood by Saint Philaret in 1979. What I remember of what he told me is, you're not ready for this, but we've got a fire going on. And when you have a fire blazing, you don't ask the firemen what language they speak.
Father Thomas Marretta was ordained to the priesthood by Saint Philaret of New York and has been serving as a priest for over 40 years alongside his Presbytera. They are the parents of His Grace, Bishop Maximus of Pelagonia. As well as being a priest, Father Thomas is also known for translating the great collection of the Lives of the Saints book series from Slavonic to English. He is currently the parish priest for the St. Maximus the Confessor Orthodox Church in Owego, New York. We were excited to be able to interview him during a visit there. Father Thomas, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Timothy. It's my pleasure and honor.
Okay, so we're going to be drinking Earl Grey tea today. Was there a particular reason you chose Earl Grey?
Yes, because I don't like many other types of tea except plain tea and Earl Grey tea.
Okay, so that's what we're going to do. I'm also going to be drinking Earl Grey just so that we can be together on this one. Okay, so while I'm kind of putting this here, I'm pouring that, I'd like to ask you the first question. You know, you are a priest, and so we're just wondering how that came to be. So.
Well, I was ordained, for starters.
Yes.
And I was ordained to the priesthood by Saint Philaret in 1979. He had already ordained me to the diaconate the year before. And I was ordained a priest in the Russian Church abroad. At that time, they were really quite desperate for priests. The old generation of clergymen who had come after the Second World War from Europe into America, they were dying off at a very rapid rate. In fact, my predecessor in my first parish was 99 years old. And so I was serving in a parish, and I was approached by Father Valeri Luciano, who was the senior clergyman of our diocese, who asked me if I would be willing to be ordained to the priesthood, and I said that I would. Then he offered me several possibilities of where they could send me and asked me if I had a preference. And one of those possibilities was St. Petersburg, Florida. Now, I was born in Tampa, Florida, grew up there, and I was quite familiar with that parish because when I left the New Calendar Greek Archdiocese, I attended that church while I was in college, and again when I had left seminary for a few months in order to enable my wife to complete her bachelor's degree. And so I knew some of the people there. I knew, what the life of the parish was like. I had a pretty fair idea of what the situation in the parish was. So I was ordained at Novodeviovo Monastery, where I'd also been ordained by the diaconate by Saint Philaret. And a week later, I was on the road down to Florida. Turned out all right.
Yeah, I think so.
Mostly. They survived me and I survived them.
Yeah. Now, I do want to say real quick before you continue, you kind of glanced over it, but you said that you were ordained by Saint Philaret. Yes. So what was your relationship with him like at Saint Philaret of New York?
Well, I can't say that I really knew him well. I had seen him. He'd come to Jordanville as a seminarian. And he Also, I'd been to the Synod headquarters a couple of times with groups of seminarians. And when we came, he was very gracious, sat us down, make sure we were fed, drank a beer with us, and then proceeded to speak with us. But he spoke to us as a group rather than as individuals. And so the only real conversation that I held with him at any length was after my ordination, and he told me, I'd like to speak to you before you leave. Now, of course, I was young and foolish then, and instead of writing all this down, because this was a wonderful generation of hierarchs that we had in the Russian Church abroad. I was a little too young to bump into St. John Maximovich, but besides Saint Philaret, there were others who were men of great stature. Archbishop Andrei of Novodevichy. I had the opportunity to meet with on a couple of occasions, and then privately, and then also Archbishop Averki, who was still alive in my first year in seminary. And so I can tell you what I do remember of the conversation. First, my Russian was still shaky. It was just enough to hear confessions, I would say. But his English was also not so great. And so I think we were both on the same level. We spoke in a mishmash of the two languages, but we communicated just fine. Yeah. And and what I remember of what he told me is you're not ready for this, but we've got a fire going on, and when you have a fire blazing, you don't ask the firemen what language they speak. Just as long as they do their job and put out the fire. So that was encouraging. And once I got down there, I really didn't have direct contact with him because, first of all, he never came to visit. He didn't like to fly. And of course, it was a long distance for a drive. And so his vicar, Bishop Gregory Grabi, who had formerly been the senior clergyman of the Eastern American Diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, and also the chancellor of the synod and the head of the Department of External Affairs, his Matushka had repose, and as is the custom often in the Russian Church, if it's a worthy clergyman, because he was elevated to the episcopacy. So he was the vicar bishop of Saint Philaret. And so he was really the one that I dealt with. He was a wise old man. And like all of the bishops that I've been under, gave good sound advice, was not a micromanager, but was there with a wise answer whenever you as the priest didn't really know what to do. And even if he didn't tell you what you wanted to hear exactly, he told you something that you could understand was a sensible and, as I said, even a wise answer. And thank God that has been the case of all the bishops that I've been under, including, of course, our Metropolitan Demetrios, who has those same basic characteristics.
I was told that Bishop Andre had clairvoyancy. Was there ever an experience you had that you sort of noticed it as well?
Well, of course, you don't know this at the moment that the person is talking with you. As I said, I visited with him twice, both times with my Matuszka. And he spoke about many things, which, again, I didn't have the sense at that time to write those things down. After St. Maximus Parish was founded, which was right at the very beginning of the year 2007, Matuszka said to me, "You remember that Vladika Andrei said to you that you will found an Orthodox community." And I sort of thought for a moment, and I was, yes, he did say that. I remember that now. But I had totally forgotten about it. I should explain that I was sent off to what was probably the most Russian community in the Russian Church abroad in the United States. Why? Because the average age of the parishioners was 79 years old. So here I was, when I arrived there, just shy of my 25th birthday, below the canonical age, obviously, but because, the situation. Now, of course, there were many of them that spoke adequate English, and there were others that you wonder how they managed with, knowing so little English. Some of them, well, they knew two things: the bank and the grocery store. But so I basically wound up becoming the Russian social worker, I guess you could say, for this community, which was, a fairly large community. I don't know if it's because it was in St. Petersburg that drew them there, or the beach, or the sun, or whatever. So as I envisioned my life, both times that I went there, I think perhaps once it was while I was a married seminarian, and the second time was while I was a deacon, to speak with Vladika Andrei. And I didn't really go there to talk with him about anything particular, just to hear him talk. What I envisioned my life is, okay, you're going to be serving Russian parishes, and that's it. Of course, when we're young, we have an idea of what we think our life is going to turn out like, but in reality, the only thing we can be certain of is that this is not going to turn out the way that you think it's going to turn out. And it confirmed for me the things that were said of Vladika Andrei, which at the time I was speaking with him, of course I had heard those things, but there was no way that I could confirm from what he was saying, because he didn't say anything in particular that was, told me, you're thinking about such and such, but, as it turned out many years later.
Now, when you were at the seminary, how did that influence your life before you became a priest?
Well, the year that I began seminary was the first year that there was a really big batch of students who knew no Russian. And so the main thing that we got in the first year was really intensive Russian, which initially went down hard with a lot of us because we weren't really there, we weren't really avid linguists. And so it took a few months, but I remember after Nativity and having kicked against the goads for a few months, I realized, okay, you've got to throw yourself into this because, well, not only is it necessary, but this is the most, at that time, it seemed like the most likely place you're going to wind up in is some sort of Russian parish. And without this, you're not going to be able to do your work. And if you have anything spiritually that you can give to your parishioners, you're not going to be able to convey it very well unless you can express yourself. Well, it doesn't have to be perfectly, but it has to be adequately. And so the proximity to the monastery, that closeness to the monastery made all the difference in the world, because I saw and got to know some rather well monks who were spiritually mature. So what I saw in the fathers there, some of whom were somewhat more erudite, and others who were basically peasants, but with the majority of them, what I saw is that they had their idiosyncrasies, but they were all spiritual exemplars, almost all of them. And even one or two that had some major flaws also had something to teach you. And so from them, from their persons, more than the academic program, I really learned what a person who had Holy Orthodoxy coursing through their blood is. And frankly, when I arrived at my first parish, I saw many of these same characteristics in the best of my parishioners. What I had was a general feeling is that I absolutely cannot do this on my own, but that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So that the main prerequisite to being a parish priest, a pastor, a spiritual father, is that you intensely cultivate your own spiritual life. That you yourself learn to live liturgically. That you learn to pray not formally, but in spirit and in truth. That you cultivate mental prayer as being the most direct path towards achieving a state of spiritual tranquility and to reaching an inner condition where other people's problems don't derail you. I am fond of saying it, my parishioners in that first parish, is that when they were good, they were really good. I mean, like as in no other parish I've been. But when they were bad, they were really bad. And so it could be something of an emotional roller coaster. Prayer is the door to success in every undertaking, but in particular, it's the door to success in being a parish priest. Because what are you there for? You're there to do the will of God. And prayer is what opens your eyes to the will of God, of course, at least in part, and gives you the strength to accept that it's not going to go the way that you would like it to go ideally, in your mind, your conception. God many times allows things, let's say all the time allows things for your benefit and to teach you something. Of course, when you're elderly, as now I am, I look back and I understand that every temptation that I've had, both in my personal life and also in my life as a pastor, no matter how unpleasant it seemed at the time, that it was absolutely necessary for me. To just give you one example, why this is so, is that, of course, a priest has to deal with every conceivable situation you can imagine and others that you can't imagine. And if you haven't endured something somehow like that, with the suffering, you can't speak compellingly to the person whom you're trying to help. And so therefore, God sends you trials, temptations, and things that, it's kind of hard to like when you're actually undergoing them, because maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, you're going to need that to draw on. So you acquire, through the prayer, through the temptations, this state of resignation to the will of God. The parish seems to be going down. The will of God. I'll do my best, but I'm not going to lose my tranquility over it. I served the liturgy and somebody popped something on me that I wasn't expecting, and I spoke to the person in a way that I went away feeling like, well, should I have said that? Maybe I'm going to push that person farther away from the church, and so on and so forth. Instead of getting upset about it, instead of losing your peace, being anxious or so forth. No. You have to try your best, but then you leave it in God's hands. Give your parishioners credit for more than that. They know that you're a human being, and they know that you're not Christ the Lord. Yes, you're going to say inappropriate things. You're going to say sometimes harmful things. But for the most part, if they themselves have the love of Christ in their heart, they'll forgive you. Now, you may have to work on repairing the damage sometimes, or sometimes you may not be possible to repair the damage. But somehow that's all in God's plan too.
Now, is there a story from your life that you might tell someone if that person was going to become a priest? So there's a story from your life that you think would be helpful for that person to know?
Well, how about a counsel from somebody? When I was a young priest, Father Hilarion, who was later Metropolitan of Rocor MP, was my spiritual father. I remember him telling me this, is put your priesthood first. Don't neglect your other responsibilities, whether it's to your family, your job, if you have a secular job, and so forth. But those things are secondary. Your priesthood is first. Don't worry about finances. God takes care of priests. And of course, he takes care of all of us. His providence is over all of us. But he has a special care for priests because not just now, but if you think back in times past, in Russia, in Greece, and so forth, the material circumstances of the priests were never great. And yet, they managed. I've never heard of priests starving or being, having no roof over his head, unless he was maybe a drunkard, and but just try to do the will of God as best you can, and don't worry about your employment and or anything else. Just put everything in God's hands. Whenever you're given something material from the parish or from an individual, accept it. In most cases, just accept it the first time, humbly, but if it's a poor person, you can try to keep them from giving to it. But if they insist, take that too. But don't worry about if the parish is not able to provide, or in those days, typical Rocor parish. I was fortunate in my first parish, I didn't have to work a secular job. The parish was large enough. But most Rocor parishes in that time could provide something for the parish. They could provide a rectory usually and a very small salary, sometimes, and that was usually about it. Or utilities usually on the house, usually, and then you had to fed them for the rest. God will provide. And then you have a helpmeet. And of course, the Presbytera should be willing, do what she can to help the priest. I've been very fortunate. My those who know her know she's not a church mouse, okay, in the church in the middle of everything. But behind the scenes, I couldn't have done it without her. So God provides for priests. And so if you have a seminarian who feels that, okay, how am I going to manage? The babies are coming. And I'm going to wind up in, someplace with 20 parishioners, and they don't have a house for me, and this and that and the other. Well, first of all, understand that if you have to be satisfied with a little, okay. When we first got down to St. Petersburg, all they had was a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the back of the church in a very bad neighborhood. As far as I knew, that's where we were going to be at, and I was going to have to be, I know there's old people, I was going to have to be, going at it all hours of the night, and leaving my Matrushka and my child there in that bad neighborhood that had bars on the windows of the little house. And within a few months, the parish had, basically on their initiative, not on my initiative, they said, we've got to get, this is a young family, we need to get them out of that neighborhood and in what would be normal basic housing for them. Because I know some priests that, they really get caught up with this and they try to, kind of, I don't want to say squeeze the parish a little bit, come on, you can do a little better than that, and so on and so forth. No, no, no. Don't do that. If it comes from them, fine. You've got to be the one to sacrifice, or at least to be willing to sacrifice more than anybody else. Just like you need to show in your spiritual life, not that you're putting it out, for display. You have to do more than the others. In the same way that an abbot in a monastery or an elder in a monastery should try to do more than the other monks, you have to do more than the laity, if at all possible.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Tea Time at the Seminary. We're taking a quick break to invite you to a special Tea Time live episode happening on Giving Tuesday, November 28th. Join us live in having a cup of tea with students, faculty, and a special guest. You'll have an opportunity to submit questions of your own, as well as get a behind-the-scenes look at how we film our Tea Time episodes. This event is being held to help raise funds for the seminary's YouTube channel and media efforts. That means more Tea Time interviews, more public lectures, and more edifying and educational content that will be seen by people around the world. You can give a gift today through the link in the description. Subscribe to the channel and join us for tea this Giving Tuesday. Thank you. And now back to the interview.
Are you going to join me?
I think it will, yeah. So if there's a situation where you have this parish and then somebody decides, maybe this person has gone to church, every week they're always there, and then maybe one day they're just not there anymore, and you lose a parishioner.
The first thing you have to do is overcome your own discouragement. Because you can't give to other people what you don't have yourself. Not really. You can make a show of that. But people, especially people that know you well, have a tendency to be able to see through that. Most of the parishioners, and perhaps more than all of them, feels the loss of a sheep, especially a sheep that wasn't going around biting him and other people. Because there are those too. And then he has to fight the opposite temptation, which is, thank God that that person is left, which, of course, again, sometimes they leave in order to, so that the others won't be adversely affected. But let's say it's a person who's, behaved normally and pretty much and so forth, and they just got tangled up. He has to overcome his own inner warfare, which means that he must pray with force. He must pray intensely. The key to overcoming, or as best possible, thoughts that disturb our emotional tranquility, and through that disturb our spiritual tranquility, is mental prayer. So we have to learn mental prayer with force and intensity, and also to practice it in a disciplined way. And when we've achieved a certain stability in this, then when situations such as the one that you mentioned, which disturb the inner man, cause us to lose our inner tranquility, and we may fall into despondency, and at the very least we have racing thoughts that we can't, Okay. We've already learned by our intense spiritual warfare with our thoughts how this problem is dealt with. And so therefore we apply ourselves to prayer generally, but in particular mental prayer, that enables one to quiet the disquiet in, let's say, shorter order than would be the case otherwise. So let's say this was a huge temptation, okay? And this person not only often left the parish, but he influenced another 2 or 3 families to leave the parish, and all of a sudden you just saw a third of your parish leave. And so that, of course, is really going to cause a lot of inner turmoil, both for the priest and, obviously for the parishioners. And sometimes it's the things that the priest is doing right that become the reasons the person say that, and so that, of course, is doubly discouraging, because if they tell you something that you're doing wrong, then, of course, then your route is to try to humble yourself and say, well, this is what I get, the way I act. So when you learn to pray in this manner, then you apply it. And so if it was a big temptation like that, then instead of being totally off the rails for 3 months about it, maybe you're only going to be off the rails for 3 weeks. Okay, and if it's a smaller temptation, which maybe you would have been off the rails for 3 weeks, now with intense prayer, maybe it's only going to be 3 days. And if it was one that you were going to be off the rails for 3 days, then with intense prayer, maybe only for 3 hours. And then, of course, the arrows of infants will be shot at you by the evil ones from time to time, but they'll just bounce off of you. So you have to strive and beg God, and then to give you this ability, which of course may not come immediately, just because a person is made a priest. God gives him, of course, a special grace, but that doesn't mean that that all of a sudden he becomes all wise, all victorious in his spiritual warfare, and so on and so forth. But he has to suffer, and he has to acquire patience too, and so it may take a while. But once you have this, then when a situation like that occurs, then the first thing to tell your parishioners is, consider the days we live in. It's not surprising that one person went off. It's surprising that one person remains. You can convey that to the parishioners in such a way that they understand that it's not just pretty words, but that really is the situation. That without the grace of God shielding us and protecting us, our parishes would all just go to pieces in no time. The evil, not only, of course, is at the will of the evil one, but the wider situation in society is such that we, from a rational standpoint, we ought not expect anything but total breakdown. However, that doesn't happen. We have defeats, but we also have victories. And sometimes the things that we consider to be the big victories may not be. So, for example, we've had, in the past year or so, a family of inquirers come, and then they left. They went to one of the World Orthodox churches, and it was a shame because, I think they were a nice family. We had another situation where a person that had been baptized a year ago left, and without even telling me anything beforehand. I knew something was wrong, of course, but I didn't know what specifically, because I don't like to thrust myself on people, and so therefore, because that usually has a worse effect. Of course, there are some times when you should and you have to, but so it came semi out of the blue. These seemed like discouraging things, especially because in our situation here, the demographics are not good for us. We're out in the middle of nowhere. The local towns are not large, and people don't move here; they move away from here. Okay, and which is a shame because this area actually offers an awful lot. The cost of living is cheap. Currently, unemployment is very low. You may not be able to easily get a high-paying job, but there is plenty of work for anybody who wants to work. So, when something like this happens, it hurts. And you think, okay, so what's going to become of the parish in the long run, and, et cetera, et cetera. God knows the hearts of all of us, of course, infinitely and beyond infinitely better than we know our own hearts. And finally, and most importantly, the thing that needs to be pointed out to the parishioners in this situation is that it's the will of God that we welcome. Not our will, no matter how good it seems to us, or how correct that seems to be. And so if that will was, and of course by will I also include here God's permission, which is still called his will because it nevertheless works his will. The things that occur even with sin, but of course by God's permission, God turns into good. And never is the evil greater than the good that God brings out of it. That if we really believe this, then even the things that happen that don't seem like they're good things, they're most definitely within the scope of divine providence. And what could we possibly wish for more than that? I try to pray every day for the parish that it will grow, but even more I pray that it prospers spiritually. And because the numerical increase, while that is of course a beautiful thing, is less important than the spiritual increase, which may not entail numerical increase at all. It may entail a numerical decrease. It may happen. When there's persecution, the church may decrease in number. You know, we saw this in Russia, for example, after the revolution. But the spiritual harvest was very, very great.
Can you think of any saint stories that you'd recommend for your kids for them to listen to?
All of them.
Oh, there we go. That's the answer.
All of them. The more the better.